This essay example, as well as thousands of others, is available in text format on our website for free and without registration. Simply Google Ivy Panda Free Essays.
Introduction. A considerable number of teenagers around the globe extensively suffer from depression. Depression can lead to several unpleasant behaviors, especially when left unattended. However, as much as the teen is extremely vulnerable to depression, most of them adopt several mechanisms that significantly assist them in containing their situation. Although the methods employed vary from one individual to another, some may employ constructive measures, while others use unhelpful approaches. Teen depression. Understanding teen depression. It is noted that teen depression is primarily caused by two common factors, i.e., unanswered sorrow and emotional disconnection. Unanswered sorrows are caused by certain life experiences, such as the loss of loved ones, desertion, and disturbing events. On the other hand, emotional disconnection is caused by the fear of being unable to correlate with others. Many people misunderstand teen depression, which is due to their several interesting behaviors at this stage. Therefore, it is extremely necessary to understand teenagers, in case one intends to detect and assist the teenagers' fight against depression. Depression is an awful illness for teens since it causes extraordinary grief, fury, or despair among these youngsters. Furthermore, it is also a lethal disease. Many people have perished after suffering severe depression, i.e., either by committing suicide or by natural death. Sources indicate that approximately 20% of depressed teens never seek help despite the knowledge that it's curable. However, it is noted that the majority who seek treatment approach persons such as teachers or parents, who often assist them in getting the best treatment. Symptoms of depression in teenagers. It is extremely difficult to detect a depressed teenager. This is because most depression symptoms are similar to certain normal behaviors of teens. Some of depression symptoms can be summarized as rejection of parents and friends, restlessness, fatigue, lack of concentration and enthusiasm, and significant changes in sleeping and eating patterns. However, the most regular symptoms are considered as follows: extraordinary sensitivity to criticism, rejection of friends and families, fuming moods, and unexplained pains. Impacts of depression on teenagers. Depression is characterized by several effects. However, most of them impact negatively on teens. Untreated teens end up using illegal drugs, having classwork problems and eating disorders, portraying immature behaviors, and having low self-worth. Furthermore, some of them become violent, practice lots of reckless activities, and, in some instances, even threaten to commit suicide. How to help depressed teenagers. Teenagers seek help from persons they trust. Therefore, for one to assist them, he or she must display certain tolerable and friendly qualities. One needs to be understanding and offer extensive support to depressed teens. Furthermore, one must listen with kindness and later emphasize to them the importance of seeking treatment. It is also helpful to notify the teenagers how they can seek treatment, i.e., by advising them to consult doctors or any other specialist and maybe explore other treatment options. How teens cope with depression. Teenagers employ different approaches in their attempt to cope with depression. Some teens employ positive approaches, whereas others use unconstructive measures, which end up messing up their promising lives. Constructive approaches significantly assist teens in learning to manage their depression, whereas most unconstructive measures destroy teenagers' lives. Constructive ways used by teens. Teens employ several constructive ways of handling depression during their adolescent stage. For instance, a considerable percentage of teens use extracurricular activities, such as sports and games, to cope with depression. They spend many of their free hours playing different sports, games, and other co-curricular activities. This extensively assists them cope with depression since most of their free time is spent on sports instead of idling with a depressed mind. Unconstructive ways used by teens. A number of teens employ several unconstructive approaches to coping with depression during their adolescent stage. For instance, a significant number of teenagers use drugs as a way of escaping their mental problems. They smoke, sniff, and drink unhealthy drugs such as marijuana, cocaine, and alcohol, respectively. Interestingly, most of these teens are often convinced that drug abuse does solve their problems. This is extremely unfortunate to them since the abuse of drugs does not, in any way, solve their problems. Instead, it further complicates them to the extent of being uncontrollable. A considerable number of teenagers engage in reckless behaviors as a way of expressing their humiliation and depression. They often feel relieved after doing or participating in certain irresponsible behaviors such as shoplifting. However, the relief is momentary, thus, they keep on repeating the immature behaviors. Some teenagers also keep off their friends and families when they are depressed. Their primary intention is always not to abandon their friends, but to avoid discussions and conversations that might complicate their situation. However, this is not necessarily a dire approach since it may work well for some teens. Conclusion: depression is a common illness among teens, and it is associated with several complications, including disagreeable behaviors. It is, therefore, imperative to unmistakably understand teenagers in case one intends to assist them. This is because of the misconceptions surrounding their teenage lives, thus, one may misinterpret some of them as unusual behaviors. Teens employ several approaches in coping with depression, some of them being beneficial, while others are unconstructive. This essay on understanding teen depression was written and submitted by a student just like you. The IvyPanda Samples database hosts thousands of works similar to this one on various subjects. Visit ivypanda.com to find what you are looking for.